Chapter 2 of Bill Bradley's Values of the Game. Discipline, the virtuous circle. Starts with a picture of one of the greatest basketball players to ever play the game, the Big O, Oscar Robertson. First and only player to have ever averaged a triple-double before Russell Westbrook inexplicably did it twice in a row. That was harder to say than it might have been to do. But the Big O was one of the all-time greats. The caption for the Big O, before we start the chapter, it says, Oscar Robertson was in many respects the perfect player, solid in all the game's fundamentals. He could dribble, pass, defend, and rebound, and he never took a 20-foot shot if he could get one closer to the basket. With his textbook fall-away shot, he averaged nearly 26 points a game over his 14-year career. Once again, Chapter 2, The Virtuous Circle, Discipline. In Crystal City, Missouri, when I was growing up, my basketball heroes were Bob Pettit, Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, and Jerry West. When I was 14, I went to a week-long basketball camp run by Easy Ed McCauley, a forward for the St. Louis Hawks, who had returned to his hometown in a trade. An epical one, it turns out, that sent Bill Russell to the Boston Celtics. McCauley and his staff gave morning lectures on proper attitude and other aspects of basketball. And at one of these lectures, he said, if you're not practicing, just remember, someone, somewhere, is practicing, and when you two meet again, given roughly equal ability, he will win. Those words made a deep impression on me. I decided I never wanted to lose simply because I hadn't made the effort, and I intensified an already intense routine. Beginning that year, and all through high school, I practiced from June to September, 4 days a week, 3 hours a day. From September to March, I practiced 3 to 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 5 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday. In the fall, before basketball season began, I ran along the streets in town, through fields, over railroad tracks, down to the banks of the Mississippi and back. To improve my vertical leap, I wore weights in my shoes and jumped to touch the rim for 4 sets of 15 jumps each, with alternating hands. I practiced dribbling by wearing plastic glasses that prevented me from looking down at the ball and forced me to keep my eyes on the court ahead of me. I formed an obstacle course with the gym's metal folding chairs, weaving among them with a crossover dribble. I stacked chairs and towers to practice shooting hook shots over an imaginary 7-footer. Alone in the gym, I made moves to the baseline, reverse pivoted back to the lane, gave a head fake, then changed the ball from one hand to the other for the layup. I shot set shots and then jump shots from 5 different places on the floor, with the backspin often bringing the ball back to me as if it were a yo-yo on a string. I kept shooting until I had hit 25 in a row from each spot with the set shot and 25 in a row with the jump shot. If I missed number 23, I started over. And above all, I played wherever there was a good game, sometimes driving twice a day to St. Louis during the summer for pickup scrimmages. When a 15-year-old female classmate telephoned one night to flirt, I somewhat doltishly protested that my real girlfriend was basketball. In retrospect, I think I probably spent an excessive amount of time in the gym during those years. But the byproduct of those countless hours of practice was a self-discipline that carried over into every aspect of my life. My freshman year at Princeton was a struggle academically. Many of my classmates were from prep schools and had essentially covered the first year's classwork the year before. I was from a small-town high school in the Midwest, and Ivy League standards were new to me and very, very difficult. Spring midterms went badly, so I quit freshman baseball, my second sport, and virtually lived in the library. I barely made it through the first year. But by my senior year, having kept up the work pattern I established out of necessity as a freshman, I achieved a respectable record. in the U.S. Senate, along the campaign trail, or in any number of projects I became involved with after Princeton, it was the same story. I was determined that no one would outwork me. Basketball had lit that fire, and it burned in many directions. As I grew older and met my basketball heroes and even defeated some of them, I realized that my way of doing things was not at all unique. Most of the pros had developed their skills by paying their dues and practice time. The biggest myth in basketball is that of the, quote, natural player. Remember, Michael Jordan was cut from his high school team. The need for discipline applies first to conditioning. It's painful and grueling, but there's no alternative. You can't lead the fast break or tear down 20 rebounds a game if you can't run and jump without fatigue. Getting into shape and pushing the body to new levels every day is a mental activity. When you believe that you can't do another lap, or another push-up, or another abdominal crunch, your mind forces you to go ahead. When your wind is short and you have a pain in your side from running, only your mind can get you to withstand the pain and go on. As UCLA's legendary coach John Wooden says, nothing will work unless you do. I used to hate getting into shape, no matter which routines I followed. Laps, line drills, playing one-on-one full court, running the floor while passing the ball back and forth with two teammates. After 6 weeks of agony, during which every part of my body ached so badly that many mornings I crawled from bed to bathroom to soak in a hot tub, the pain began to diminish, and the muscles started to come around. When you train seriously for basketball, you learn the difference between getting into condition and getting into condition. In the lesser of those two states, you can run up and down the floor and do what you have to do without the interference of fatigue. But you're not really in peak condition until you can cruise when others push. When your body is honed, you can run your opponents around and around with little immediate purpose beyond tiring them out, making them angry, or distracting them from any defensive concentration. My toughest opponent, John Havlicek of the Boston Celtics, was a true genius when it came to using conditioning as a weapon. His goal was to get his opponent to give up, to stop overcoming fatigue, to stop pushing himself. Havlicek saw it as a matter of who gives up first. Quote, "You'll pass out before you're overworked, but most people don't know that," he once told Orlando Magic Senior Executive Vice President Pat Williams. "They think they're overworked, so they stop. They could have kept going, but they didn't. They weren't beat physically, they were beat mentally." Quick, readers aside, not advocating working until you pass out, advocating pushing yourself, like Bill Bradley said, just as hard as you possibly can. Back to the story. Skill development comes next. The critical years are in high school, and the real preparation begins when the season ends. Off-season is when major leaps occur in a high school player's abilities, when you develop the crossover dribble, the reverse pivot, and opposite hand shooting. The only way to become a shooter is by shooting, not only in scrimmages but alone. It's like learning to walk. Once babies master the basics, they no longer have to think about how to walk. The same is true of shooting. Once you've mastered your techniques and found your rhythm, you never lose them. They become your individual basketball signature. As you grow older, your legs can go bad, and running will become more difficult, but you never lose the shooting. It may be harder to get into position to take the shots, but to hit them shouldn't be a struggle. Then again, if you don't have the will to get the shot down, to do it over and over, you'll never be a shooter at all. The great thing about discipline is that you can't get immediate returns on your investment of time and effort. The harder you work, the sooner your skills improve. I want to correct myself there. I misread that. The sentence that opened that paragraph should have said, "The great thing about discipline is that you can get immediate returns on your investment of time and effort." The harder you work, the sooner your skills improve. Then the virtuous circle takes over. As your skills grow, you get a rush of self-confidence, which spurs you to continue working, and your skills increase all the faster. Practice pays off more when you concentrate while you're doing it, but that's harder than it sounds. In shooting practice, there's no crowd. Sometimes it's just you, the ball, and the basket. In order to hit 25 in a row in high school, I had to concentrate. Think about what I was doing, and get the feel of all the elements involved. The legs, the elbow, the follow-through. My mind was focused on each attempt. I was grooving my shot. By the time I was 21, total involvement in shooting practice was more difficult. I had to reduce the number of consecutive shots to 15 in a row. And by the time I was 35, I couldn't force myself to do more than 10 out of 13. While it was true that after 20 years of practice I knew what I was doing technically, I also found my mind wandering in the mist of the routine, to the day's headlines, to a comment a friend had made, to anything but shooting. As a result, I couldn't hit practice shots as consistently as I had in high school and college. That realization was part of what told me it was time to quit. As difficult as individual discipline is, it pales next to team demands. Hitting the open man with the pass and staying in a pattern or play until its conclusion require unique, uncommon self-control. It takes real character to derive enjoyment from the pass that leads to the pass that leads to the basket. If one player fails to make the interim pass to block out for a rebound or to take the open shot, it affects the whole team. Coach Jerry Sloan's Utah Jazz and Pat Summitt's Tennessee Lady Vols epitomize seamless team offense. A man-to-man defense requires team discipline too. There's no such thing as, I stop my man, if the 3 other opposing players scored at will. When a player goes for a steal and misses, his teammates have to pick up his man quickly. When a player covers for the teammate making the steal attempt, another teammate has to move over and cover for the one helping the stealer. A willingness to make yourself vulnerable to catcalls from the fans if your man scores while you're helping your teammates is the ultimate test of a disciplined team defense. Determination sits at the core of discipline, and the will to excel sits at the core of determination. Determination sits at the core of discipline, and the will to excel sits at the core of determination. You don't have to be a pro to learn that lesson from basketball. When I failed as a rookie guard in the NBA, my desire to succeed placed a resolute grid of practice over my entire offseason. I had known in high school and college how it felt to be regarded as the best. I preferred that feeling to the sense of failure I had after my first pro year. Only later did I realize that I had worked all summer not just to hone my skills, but to regain my self-respect. In 1973, the Knicks played the Celtics for the NBA Eastern Conference Championship. We lost the 6th game in New York, sending the final game back to Boston, where the Celtics had never lost the 7th game of a playoff, ever. The day before the game, Ned Irish, the president of the Knicks, made one of his very rare appearances at practice. He said, partly in anger and partly out of calculation, that we should be ashamed of ourselves, that we had had a great year within our grasp but had thrown it all away the night before. He ended by saying that we didn't have much of a chance in Boston. Some teams would have quit on themselves at this point, but Irish's scathing commentary fired us up. The next day we played one of our best disciplined defensive games, and we won not only the game, but the NBA championship that year as well. Learning the discipline it takes to succeed in basketball teaches a fine appreciation for how hard you have to work. The difficulty of preparation contributes to the sense of triumph. As Lao Tzu put it, quote, mastery of others is strength. Mastery of yourself is true power. Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, a Chinese philosophical treatise and way of life that would warrant much further exploration, just not in this setting. But we'll read what Lao Tzu said one more time. Quote, "Mastery of others is strength. Mastery of yourself is true power." When you overcome adversity with self-discipline and you win a hard-fought battle, the elation explodes. There are few things in life better than that. Let's take a look at a couple photos of some stars throughout that chapter. Here we have Bill Bradley training at Oxford University while he was studying under his Rhodes Scholarship. So Bill Bradley went to Princeton for 4 years, and after which, instead of going to the NBA where he would have been drafted, he accepted an invitation by the Oxford University in Oxford, England, one of the most prestigious of all universities, who each year hands out a select few scholarships to students who come to study under the Rhodes Scholarship. They become what's called Rhodes Scholars through that program. Bill Bradley was selected to do that. And before he went to the NBA, he spent time at Oxford, delaying his professional career by 2 years. Here also we have the legendary coach John Wooden, winner of 10 NCAA championships, 10 out of 12. Most dominant coach in the history of collegiate basketball, and one of the most decorated and influential members of the entire pantheon of basketball history. And in this third picture, we see an exhausted but exuberant Phil Jackson sitting in a tub after a game, reflecting upon a big win against the Boston Celtics in Game 7 of the NBA Eastern Conference Championship of 1973. We also have Larry Legend with his patented shooting form, unorthodox but unforgettable and undeniable, the greatness of this man as a shooter, but more than that, as a basketball player. Larry Bird could do whatever it took to win a game, and often did. Here is an important and interesting and oftentimes forgotten period of NBA basketball, represented by this picture of the Houston Rockets getting out in transition, led by Sam Cassell, Vernon Maxwell, and Robert Big Shot Horry. Sam Cassell, Vernon Maxwell, and Big Shot Bob Horry back here, out in transition at some point during the Houston Rockets' mini dynastic efforts of winning 2 straight NBA championships that were sandwiched between the 2 Bulls three-peats. Here we have 3 of the greatest shooters that this game has ever seen. Inarguably 3 of the 25 best shooters of the basketball in the history of basketball right here, in my opinion. We got Glenn Rice, who absolutely filled it up. I believe he still holds the record, I may be mistaken here, for most points in an NCAA tournament over the course of his championship with, I believe, the Michigan Wolverines in the early to mid-'80s, or mid to late 80s. You got Rick Barry, who, among other distinctions, was the father of 2 professional basketball-playing sons. But Rick Barry was lethal as a shooter, sharpshooter for the Golden State Warriors in the late 60s and 70s. Known also for his almost automatic foul shot that he used to shoot and throughout his entire career, granny style, where he would put it between his legs and spin it backwards and release straight into the hoop. And here is Jerry West, the logo himself, who is one of the most important figures in the history of basketball because of how highly he played the game and how his legend lives on through his contributions to the front office of multiple NBA franchises. He's a championship he's a championship front office person and a spectacular NBA player in his own right. Thank you, and we'll be back with Chapter 3, Selflessness.